There are people claiming that socialism was already achieved in some countries, which includes the entire Eastern Bloc, fascist governments in Europe, China, Cuba, and according to some libertarians, modern United States of America. Their definition of socialism is of a system of a strong centralized government, a disrespect of property rights, central planning, and an array of wealth and income redistributions, as well as social programs.
Socialism is what we have today in this country. Please don't have your head explode. So what socialism means is the government does some things and the private industry does some things, right?
Although they might be right to a certain degree, in the present time there is a new generation of socialists who interpret the work of Marx, Engels, and co. differently, precisely as a system of social organization where businesses are operated by co-ops, state has either to wither away, or the dictatorship of the proletariat really means something else. Classes do not exist, people live in harmony and have a lot of leisure time, and the family unit is abolished and children are raised communally, landlords are non-existent, nor does wealth inheritance. Now, it isn't clear what Marx has thought of stocks and the banking industry besides calling them fictitious capital, because they are not tied to labor, so I assume they are outlawed as well. Anyways, with that definition set in mind, I hope I didn't upset the Libertarian Socialists out there and they are satisfied with it, and let me tell you 10 reasons why I think that socialism cannot be achieved in the modern era. The so-called tankies or orthodox Marxists, besides losing the modern intellectual battle against the new Marxist left, are still right on a couple of things. One thing that they are right about the most is the necessity of government. All revolutions or new formations collapse in a liberal system as people change their minds. Besides, one cannot entertain the communistic lifestyle of communal ownership of property and anarchism without a force to uphold it. A dictatorship of the proletariat, if you will. A Marxist ideology will quickly devolve into chaos and multi-ideology. In the modern context of welfare states and border protections, this idea is not even worth entertaining, as the power and necessity of states as a regulator of public life is increasing and will continue to increase in this century. Marx and Engels as well as Lenin had all rejected democratic transformations and called for authoritarian measures in order to secure a revolution and implement a transition from socialism to communism, unlike their more democratic contemporaries, which is self-evident by Marx's critique of the Gotha program, the Communist Manifesto, Engels' writing on authority, and Lenin's State and Revolution. To quote Friedrich Engels, "A revolution is certainly the most authoritarian thing that there is. It is an act whereby one part of the population imposes its will upon the other part by means of rifles, bayonets, and cannon. Authoritarian means if such there be at all, and if the victorious party does not want to have fought in vain, it must maintain this rule by means of the terror which its arms inspire in the reactionists. Therefore, a stateless or democratic version of socialism is highly implausible, as well as it will quickly cease to exist." Point number 2. Socialism, just like Rousseau's general will and fascism, demands a whole lot from people to surrender their personal interests for the sake of the collective. Precisely, to give up their freedoms, which includes all significant inheritance, especially if it's land, including 65% of Americans who own a house. All property from which one can make money if another person is working for them, copyrights, investment, and ability to start business in the traditional business model is going to be outlawed as well. As you can guess, people will not be willing to give up their freedoms. Perhaps it will be appealing to 30% of the economically unsuccessful, yet for most people they will reject it, and therefore Marxists will never win an election if they share those beliefs, nor secure a revolution against a very strong military and the police force. Moreover, this is not the only side of Marxism that is not appealing. Marxism also advocates for a destruction of the family unit, raising children by the commune, polyamorous relationships, in some cases the abolition of the hierarchy of competence, borderlessness, and decentralization, decreasing the potential amount of people supporting this type of an ideology to about less than 1%. Most people are not naturally drawn to this type of social organization, not to mention myself, who has abandoned Marxism because it had advocated for this type of lifestyle. In reality, hierarchy, civilization, and the state, as well as high culture, are the height of the human civilization and progress, while its opposite is primitive and is present throughout archaic societies. People of high development will not give up their rights and self-interests in favor of this type of lifestyle. As I have mentioned prior, Marx has no answers about fictitious capital, but was also wrong about decreasing wages, was wrong about predicting revolutions, had provided no concrete guide for the implementation of socialism, operated under historical materialism defined by class conflict, and claimed that the mode of economic production determines culture, not to mention did not really understand how value is determined nor how incentives are formed. His weakest point, however, is probably identifying and categorizing economic systems and claiming that class conflict and labor relations are driving them. For the sake of the argument, let's assume those divisions are correct. But then you can have the 19th century United States being both a slave and a capitalist economy, but not a feudal economy, and the Soviet Union engaging in both capitalism and feudalism, at least during the kolkhoz era, and according to some people, socialism as well, all at the same time. Now, I'm well aware that many modes of production can coexist parallel to each other. Most people, however, are not able to understand that, and even those who do act like they don't. Combine that to the modern world of cryptocurrency, transnational corporations, respects of civil rights and empiricistic culture, at least to recent times, socialism looks like a bunch of bunk that is highly outdated and fails to properly explain the reality nor to provide productive answers. Those concepts are very vague, often are post hoc and develop ethnocentrically, not to mention fail to be falsified and therefore have no merit. Socialism, besides being associated with the horrors of the Soviet Union, Maoist China, and the Khmer Rouge, has another deep issue. Look at this map. This is the map where either socialist revolution has occurred, a socialist/communist leader got elected, and then either got toppled down or replaced with another leader, or a country either got invaded and made to be socialist. Notice how this map also excludes temporary socialist countries that existed during civil wars. But in any event, this is a map of failure and of a massive coup by people like Noam Chomsky, who claim that all those countries did not really try to implement socialism, or that they didn't really understand socialism, or that it was a never-ending transitionary phase kept by the corrupt elites, or it's basically suck-dams, or it's simply red fascism, or it's the fault of capitalism, or they tried socialism but then failed. But people who are smart will understand that those just are a bunch of excuses, and socialism in the definition that I have provided will always dissolve into something like that, given that since 1871 there was not a one single state that the so-called libertarian socialist would point out and say that's real socialism, or that's how socialism should be done. Socialists are not taken seriously. Point number 5. We don't need to abolish classes, we already have. Of course, in the Marxian sense, there are only two classes which are not abolished, one that owns the means of production and the other ones who has to sell his labor, but in reality this is not how classes work, and it is not how classes operated during his time, when society had constantly stratified itself and treated people with accordance to their class, where there were significant difference between, let's say, the merchant class, the common class, the intelligentsia class, the aristocratic class, or any other type of class. They they come and go, and now they don't mean anything, and are defined not by the social status as in the past or relations to the means of productions as according to Marx, but rather by an income bracket, which is an arbitrary concept that differs cross-culturally, that most people are frankly not even aware of what is considered to be a middle class. The Marxian explanation of class warfare, however, is still popular and very much alive, referred to as the conflict theory, but is being applied to group warfare, which has been used by leftists since the Frankfurt School. It is fairly evident that in the present time, group warfare occurs on a racial, ethnic, sexuality, gender identity, and political orientation levels, which all come first before class. People care more for their race and sexuality than they care for the supposed class from which they belong, because unlike race, which is a biological phenomenon, class is simply a social construction, which comes and fades and changes meaning in time and depends the person who you're talking with. All the recent movements that have been happening in the past 10 years, either be it BLM, Me Too, transgender activism, the alt-right, or any other type of movements, none of them have appealed to class. And that is because class does not determine social reality anymore, unlike the aforementioned category, unless of course you're talking about wealth and education. What's very ironic is that class was abandoned by leftists themselves. No matter how you call them, socialism does not appeal to the economically successful en masse. Those people, while sharing a unity with regards to economic success, are coming from different political beliefs, despite that in the present time mostly pandering to leftists to increase their wealth. They're not going to surrender their wealth in favor of socialism. They will not give up their business empires and endeavors they spent years building, even if they believe in socialism. Examples from history show that people are hypocritical and their own self-interests always come first. My favorite example is the manifesto of voluntarily serf emancipation by Tsar Alexander I that was used by only one landlord during his reign. Moreover, the so-called capitalist class will also impose their beliefs of keeping the rights of private property onto other people using a large microphone. Currently, the elite bothers itself with silencing the right, but with a slight change of wind, as soon as they see a danger being posed from Marxists, liberals will turn against Marxists as it is inherently violent and revolutionary, receiving an applause from the right while they're at it, as the left currently applauds discrimination against right-wingers. An absolute majority of people who have turned into Marxism was turned to it due to its values and promises of equality, justice and well-being. Not to disappoint Marxists, but they don't have a monopoly on those values, and as history shows, those sentiments were present throughout history and will be present in the future. In the present time, we have UBI, social democrats, welfare states, distributism, economic populism, and other ideologies and movements that appeal to those values, and unlike Marxism, they have actually been successful in getting things done. Right-wingers such as myself will embrace economic populism, and because of that association, many left-wingers and liberals will be in the stanch defense of the current neoliberal hegemony against economic populism due to its association with the right wing. Given that almost all of those Marxists come from those two backgrounds, their size will decrease significantly, but right-wingers will not embrace Marxism due to its aesthetics and remain economic populists. In fact, I will go as far as to say that this process is undergoing right now, in the edgy spheres of the internet being referred to as the Natzball vertex. And if censorship and a feeling of powerlessness brings people towards economic populism, so be it. Capitalism, whatever it means at this point, will not fail. More than in any time in history are people investing, building businesses and exploiting the so-called capitalist infrastructure. For instance, over 55% of Americans already own stocks, though it is fairly unbalanced as is capitalism. With the right regulations being put in place, we could achieve a more equal distribution. In the current time, success is possible in almost every sphere of life. That is, if you have the good amount of genes, knowledge, money, and time to invest. Global trade and individual entrepreneurship, as well as copyrights, have never been so big as they are now. In addition to that, worker co-ops are not popular but often are a failing endeavor, and by objective measures the current worker co-ops are not what Marx and Engels had envisioned in their writings. It does not seem to me that somehow this system will cease functioning out of the blue, or that socialism its next logical continuation. Capitalism will more likely continue to be dominant, as at this point it is in the interests of most people to uphold it. Because we are all interconnected, eventually capitalism maybe will evolve into a different economical system, but that system will probably be coined after the peaceful transition had already occurred, and perhaps we are already living in that new system that had replaced capitalism, but just need someone to coin the name of this new current system. My final point is that if socialism will ever succeed, which is impossible, but let's assume it will, and be harmonious, non-violent, rainbowy, and somehow the socialist way of life is sustained, I'm afraid what will happen is that biology will eventually kick in, as people in those environments will be selected for whatever is adopted in that sort of an environment. It is likely that we will be selected for conformity, mental illnesses, addictions, non-competition, submission, strong empathy, and lower intelligence, embracing a radically slow life history strategy causing a social collapse in the future and massive dysgenic effect. As a consequence, we will lose our strength, and when socialism inevitably collapses, we are not going to be able to be adapted to new living conditions and simply start dying, as we would be during socialism. But anyways, that was all for today. I hope it has been of interest, and please send this video to your socialist friend, and hopefully they will reconsider their beliefs and subscribe to my channel.